This month's theme has been gardening. We had a gardening talk with Val Rich last week. We've got Sarah Orlowski talking about permaculture and her visits to Nicaragua. And tomorrow we've got Lorraine Dick doing her vermiculture composting talk.
Oh, awesome.
That's pretty exciting. And we've got Les Johnson here is going to videotape it, so you will be able to tell all your friends who missed it that it will be available on GFTV and our library's Facebook page. So if you haven't liked our library Facebook page yet, please do. Just make sure you don't get the one in North Dakota, though theirs is really interesting too. But for Grand Forks and District Public Library. So thank you to those who look like they just came from the garden. This is a good place to be to have your lunch nice and cool.
See, of course you didn't have to get dressed up.
And I didn't. And so, without further ado, this is Sarah Orlowski.
Hi, yes, pleased to see all of you here. That's great. Most of you I know, and I'm happy to be here today. And we're going to turn out the lights and get going on the slideshow. And I was in Nicaragua a year ago taking a permaculture design certificate course. The reason I was there was because, in spite of the fact I'd been organic gardening for 15 years, I needed the permaculture certificate to be able to teach, and I'd been offered to teach it a few times because I was already teaching sustainable agriculture. So I went to get the certificate in Nicaragua. You can do it anywhere in the world, and this island that you see on the first slide, Ometepe Island, is where I did my permaculture design course. It is an island with a double volcano. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, island in a freshwater lake in the world, which surprised me because I'm thinking of the Great Lakes, but they don't have big islands in the Great Lakes. But they do in Nicaragua. This is Nicaragua Lake. It is the biggest lake in Nicaragua. So I studied on this island. So without further ado, starting with the classroom shot of all these people. You can see they're mostly young people, so that put a little spur in my step, hanging out with the young ones for a few weeks. It was really actually quite fun. And I'll go into the detail here. So this is an African oil palm. It's actually quite an amazing tree, and it's really huge. You're just seeing it at the bottom. It's quite tall. It gives, one tree gives 640 gallons of oil a year. So it's a phenomenal amount of oil being produced from such a tree. The land that we're on is about a 43 or 45 acre piece of land that the fellow on the right there, Michael Judd, managed to purchase with some fundraising. He's an American man, to start the permaculture farm there, and they're bringing in what they call analog plants sometimes, which means plants from other parts of our planet that have similar climates and conditions, so they will grow where you move them to. And that's why the African oil palm got planted. This is an allspice, I'm still saying oil, allspice tree. It's sort of fun to see what the spice trees look like that we use commonly in our own kitchen. And so the allspice grows well in the tropics because Nicaragua is very close to the equator, of course. And then a cacao shrub here with a pod forming, and so we could get our cocoa coming out of it. And there's the close-up of the pod. And here are the beans taken from the inside, and they're drying on a screen, a simply made screen. And you can even buy raw cacao beans, actually, just to chew on. You get a little hit of caffeine out of them. And they're more bitter. They're not sweetened until they're sweetened, of course. And down there, it wasn't originally sweetened, the cacao. That was more a Western thing. A baby cinnamon tree, of course, this one wouldn't be harvested for the bark, for the spice, because it's too little, but it's just getting going there. Nice glossy leaves. And the Casal spinacia, a lot of these plants, this one in particular, and some of the next ones you'll see, are planted to be nitrogen fixers. And you can see the pods in there, as lots of the legume plants have pods. And they'll fix nitrogen into the soil. Oh, Lizanne's going to get you a chair. Well, she's got one now, so it's easy to get into. Here's a young coffee plant. actually struck me that it didn't look that much different than like a scrubby alder or something with the leaves, or Cascara sagrada from up here with kind of the washboard veins in the leaf there. But that's a little one. They grow considerably bigger than that. Now here, that whole swath of trees, those are mango trees. They planted the mango trees down there. There's lots of different kinds of mangoes, so they planted quite a few. This is one of the first things they planted on the hillside, because when they acquired this land at first, it was just an open field that had cattle grazing on it for quite some time, and they planted the mangoes to sustain the hillside from erosion, for one thing, and of course because they're a food tree as well. One of the ideas of permaculture is multifunction. So before something gets planted or built, or anything gets done, you're trying to stack functions, as they would say. So you're trying to find more than one use for everything that you do, ideally at least 3 uses. And so the mango trees would provide food, and of course they'd also help stabilize the slope. And so those got planted early on to stabilize the slope. They're about 10 years old, those trees, because they had the property. When I was there a year ago, they had been running it for 10 years, and they were one of the first plantings that went on. The other thing that got planted right away was nitrogen fixers, but I'll talk a bit more about that. This is an old water cistern that's done in the local Nicaraguan style. So it's got the stones at the bottom with a bit of mortar, and then a cement poured on top, but it is less durable in material as what they started building in the modern one. This is one that they put in, which would be built with ferro cement, and I think has a little bit of rebar in it. And of course the locals aren't going to be able to afford rebar, which is very expensive. And these things had to be brought in from outside the island too. So ferro cement has an iron component in it, hence the name, fer. But these ones are far more durable and longer lasting. The old one they're not even using anymore there.
Sorry, what island is this?
Oh, this is Ometepe Island. It's the biggest island in Nicaragua, on the biggest lake, Nicaragua Lake.
I've been there.
Oh, you've been there? Okay, awesome. There's a couple of different permaculture farms there now. And this is overlooking from the deck of one of the instructors who lives there most of the year. All the instructors, except for people brought in for specialty things, were American, though. They weren't local, but he lives there, built his house. And this is his water cistern to collect water for watering his local garden. And they also use it as a swimming hole because it can get really hot there in the warm season. I was there for the beginning of the warm season when they had just finished the rainy season. I wasn't there in the rainy season. This would be considered Zone 1 around his house. In permaculture, one of the concepts is to have different zones that you would plant different things in. Zone 1 is closest to your home. So things that require a lot of attention would be there, like you have to water them and take care of them, so they have to be close so it's easy access. Also things that you would harvest frequently, like your kitchen garden. The herbs you'd want to use in the kitchen for cooking, or the salad greens or whatever, would be in your Zone 1, ideally, because it'd be handy and quick to harvest every day. Stuff that you would not harvest so often could go into Zone 2 or 3 or 4 if it's a once-a-year harvest. It doesn't need to be so close to the house, right? So you use your logic in doing that. But on the far right, the biggest tree, that's a jackfruit tree, and they grow enormous, but that wouldn't necessarily be in Zone 1. In this case, it's in Zone 1 because it was there before the house was built. So it was already there, and they didn't want to take it down, so it gets to remain there. This is a composting toilet, which is kind of interesting. All the toilets on the property were composting toilets. The one on the left with the door shut, that would be for doing a number 2. And the one on the right would be for number 1, for just going pee. And really just the women would use it because the men could pee anywhere, of course. And also because the high nitrogen content in urine is a fertilizer. So in fact, the men would fertilize the trees to go urinate. And in fact, I don't have a slide of this, but they showed us 2 different banana trees planted at the same time. And one of them was near somebody's home where they slept, and they got up every morning and peed on this tree, and that tree was way bigger than the other tree, and they had been planted at the same time. But there's a lot of nitrogen in urine, and that will feed foliar growth, so that can be used as a natural fertilizer as well. This is the urine composting toilet that we were just looking at. Inside that hollowed tree stump is a bucket that gets emptied, actually. So that also feeds the garden too, the women's pee too. And the interns get the lovely job of emptying that. And these are the shower stalls. And they were built specifically in the fruit grove so that the water from the shower stalls, you see on the bottom left with a little white pipe, it's right at this moment disconnected, but the runoff goes to water the trees. Because during the dry season there's not much water at all, so that has to be taken into account. And so the shower stalls were strategically placed so that they could water the fruit trees. And that's another example of stacking functions, right? That you would have, consider all the different things something could do, not just one thing, like shower somebody, but also water your trees at the same time. One thing that was put forth about stacking functions is that if you're working in a group situation, which this has a whole board of people running the permaculture farm too, putting forward ideas with stacking functions or multiple functions is easier to work in a group situation, because you could say, not only can you shower here, not only can you water the trees, and not only does it have a view, because it does have a view from there, whatever else idea you had, but when you're debating what to do, if people have more than one use for something, that thing is going to win the vote, right? So that it actually helps in decision making with one person or with a group. And these are fellow students, of course.
Yeah.
Now, that's the jackfruit tree I pointed out that was by the water cistern in the zone 1 there. Those fruits are so big. And the farm, I haven't said yet, is built on the side of a volcano. When I showed you Ometepe Island on the very first slide, you saw the 2 volcanoes. It's a very large island with 2 volcanoes and an isthmus in the middle, meaning it's shaped like a barbell or an egg timer. And the jackfruit trees are just huge. So we had to haul these really heavy, they're full of water, they're enormously heavy, up. We would pick them and haul them up the mountain because the whole farm is on a steep slope. And that was a good workout. It was for me, for sure.
What do they taste like?
They taste like juicy fruit gum.
What?
And they also, like juicy fruit gum, after chewing the fruit for about 8 minutes, the flavor disappears. So it's kind of interesting. I'll show you a whole thing on jackfruit because we used it quite a bit. These 2 people are harvesting the jackfruit, the ones that are higher up, and trying to clip off the top so that it would fall down. These 2 people were in my chores group. In the morning we had chores for an hour or 2, which actually was one of our favorite part of the day because it was, exercise and we got to just do farm work and things. She was Canadian. He was Willie J. He had a nice, Southern American kind of name. And so there's a close-up of the jackfruit. They're just huge. They're like giant footballs. And here's one cut open. And the yellow stringy bit is the fruit. But you can also see the quite large seeds in there, which is also a food, almost like a legume, like you could use in like a chickpea. But you had to soak them. I'll show you. So here they're cutting out the fruit and the seeds, separating it. And you can see banana leaves are what get used as a tablecloth there. So cutting out the seeds and then collecting the fruit in one bowl and the seeds in another bowl and dealing with the fruit that way. And now the seeds are being spread out to dry by other interns. And now they're soaking before being used for cooking because they do have to be pre-soaked the way you would a dried legume. And they're kind of bland, tasting like a dried legume, but you flavor them up, and they have a protein, fiber, low-fat content, so that's why I compare them to a legume. And you could even make like a hummus out of them, really. But they don't have blenders and stuff. It was also, the only power, they had a little bit of wind and solar. There's the rainbow. We got rainbows some days, which was nice, and that big, beautiful tree is a Spanish cedar tree. As you can tell, it's a deciduous. It has no relation to what we call cedar trees in Canada, which are evergreens, of course. But these are indigenous to Nicaragua, and I bought a beautiful guitar down there made out of Spanish cedar. So I didn't bring it today, but it was it's a beautiful little thing. It's my travel guitar now. And a moringa pod, which is another leguminosa, and the flower there's moringa, I said it wrong, moringa, and there's the close-up on the bud. So just things that we collected. I was very interested in learning about the plants because I'm a herbalist, and I really only knew northern hemisphere plants, so it was fun for me to learn the tropical plants. And this plant in front of that fellow, who's one of the instructors, is chaya, which is indigenous to Nicaragua, because not all the plants on the permaculture farm are indigenous. Quite a number of them have been brought in and planted, as I mentioned, analog plants that would do well in that climate, but this one is indigenous and has a food potential in it. And they use legumes for fixing nitrogen just like we do here. And you can see that the leaves look like they're in the pea family. And all the pea family are nitrogen fixers. The Fabaceae family, so peas and beans are nitrogen fixers. And that gets planted because it'll enrich the soil. Nitrogen is very prevalent in our atmosphere, but for plants to use it, it has to be brought down into the ground. So nitrogen-fixing plants have nodes on the roots, and they're able to bring the nitrogen from the air down into the surface of the soil and fix it there. And that's why they get used in gardening to improve your soil. We do it up here, and it can also be done in other parts of the world as well.
Or lupins?
Lupins are definitely nitrogen fixers. Yeah, so lots of wild plants fix nitrogen too, and you've thought of lupins because they're in the bean family and they have those kind of leaves, right? Yeah, and so all of that family does it, but other plants are nitrogen fixers as well that are not in the bean family.
Comfrey has lots of nitrogen in its leaves.
Yeah, comfrey has lots of nitrogen in it and fixes nitrogen in the soil. Also, comfrey has a very long branching taproot, so anything with a long taproot, it brings up a lot of other minerals from the soil as well, and helps to fix nitrogen. We have tons of comfrey all around the property we're on. We're on Richard Walker's old property that used to be called Dragon Eye Nursery above Real.
Yes. My mom grew up as a child there. That was part of...
That was her house?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so
Nice.
that was one reason why.
Okay, so you know it quite well.
Well, I've actually never been there.
Oh, you've never been there? Well, you have to come by. You'll have to come by. That's nice. So, other nitrogen-fixing plants... I'm just going to go back to this one. Other nitrogen-fixing plants are generally pioneer species. Like in Canada, we have alder trees as pioneer species. It is short-lived. It only lives 60 or 70 years. And it is not in the pea family, but it does fix nitrogen.
What do you mean by a pioneer?
Okay, that's a good question. Pioneer species means it's one of the first things that's going to grow in open land.
Okay.
And they set the stage for other plants to grow.
Okay.
So the alder has that short lifespan of, say, 70 years, but during that 70 years, it's creating shade over the ground. And then the evergreens can start growing in that shade, or other plants can start growing in the shade. And by the time they're getting bigger, the alder's dying out. And then the new plants are strong enough to not need the shade for the nursery, and they grow big. And so that's what a pioneer species is, and alder is definitely a pioneer species. And it fixes nitrogen into the soil, so it's also improving the soil nutrition content. Nature has a reason for everything, which is nice. So on the right here we have Katuk, and this is Doug Bullock, who was probably the head teacher of the various teachers. We had 4 teachers, and he has his own permaculture farm on Orcas Island off Washington State. But they do this course in Nicaragua regularly. The leucaena is another nitrogen fixing plant that is also in the pea family, and you can tell by the leaves again. Those little round oval leaflets, that's definitely pea family. And this is Dave Boneline. He was another instructor. And when you live down in Nicaragua, you can let your hair do whatever you want. Nobody's going to bug you. So I thought he had pretty cool hair. So there's lots of dreads down there, which was fun. And if I'd have stayed longer, I might have come back with threads, but no, I didn't get to.
And how long ago were you there?
I was there just over a year ago.
Oh.
Yes. So it wasn't totally recent because it takes me a really long time to label those slides. Anyway, this is a Canadian woman from Vancouver, and her and I got along well, and we were in the same group. So she is watching something going on. You see she has a jackfruit behind her. The giant leaf on the right is a banana tree. What she was watching was someone picking jackfruit, which I thought would be the next slide, but wasn't. And here's Doug Bullock. He is describing planting on a slope. He's talking about different strategies for planting on a steep slope. And because there was this pile of dirt here for the nursery, and a local Nicaraguan woman would come in and talk about growing the plants and potting things up, he used the dirt to demonstrate things growing on a slope. So he kind of was using it as his blackboard, so to speak, for teaching. And here's a group of interns. They're separating seeds from pods, and you can tell that it's quite laborious work. So what they have are a lot of interns, who are mostly in their 20s because they can afford to do that. But they also travel the world, able to do that, or travel at least to Nicaragua to do it. And Costa Rica has a lot of permaculture farms now as well. It is interesting. There's different things to consider. Most of the permaculture farms in Central America are American-owned. They're not local people who are able to buy the land because the local people are very poor. And Nicaragua is a very poor country. It's not as poor as as Honduras and Dominican Republic, but it is pretty poor. And but they have done quite a bit for the community as well. So there's a give and take there. And this is Herman. He's a local guy. He's helping put in a gravity flow water system because the beauty of farming on a slope is you can have gravity flow water everywhere. The slope, in fact, is part of the volcano. So this farm is on the side of the volcano. Of
so
one
you're using
of the two.
polytubing there?
Yeah.
Is there bamboo at all?
Bamboo does get used for things, but these guys have been bringing in some of these materials, right? Because they don't want to replace them as fast. So they have some modern things like the little propane tank right there and everything. But he was a nice guy. And so they do hire locals where they can. And I know this is a little dark, but they're welding together to join there or melting it together. And here we have a mulch being made. And this was interesting for me to learn because we mulch like crazy farming, obviously. Because also in permaculture or any smart farming, really, you try not to leave your ground uncovered. One, because the nutrients grow away, wind blow away the soil, your good soil gets blown away, erosion happens if you're on a slope, microbes can die because of frost, and too hot, too cold is not good. So you're always trying to keep your soil covered. And here in Nicaragua and Central America, mulches don't last very long. So for us in Canada, a 6-inch mulch is a seriously thick mulch and it should last your whole season. They have to do a 2-foot mulch because there's so many things living and growing there. They eat that mulch down so fast. Wow. The microbes will just decimate the mulch. So they have to do a 2-foot mulch.
Wow.
But they have tons of banana trees there. And the big leaves work great for mulch, and that's what they're using here, are the banana leaves to make a mulch.
You're using a machete to chop it up?
Yep, using machete, chopping it, and here's a finished mulch, and it's got the water hose ending there, watering the tree underneath the mulch. And they have joins on the water pipes so it can go to various trees. And so that's great. Banana is not a nitrogen fixer. Banana is a heavy feeder. But it gives lots of mulch and it grows fast, and so it has its multiple uses as well, and gives food, of course. So banana trees are useful. And now I'm going to show a whole series of edible greens that are planted there, and they're all called spinach, which is really kind of indicating their edibility. But these, a lot of them were brought in. So here's a Cancun water spinach, and they taste great. I tasted all of them just to see what would go on. Polynesian bell spinach, and this was brought in from Polynesia. A lot of these things that got planted were brought from Hawaii and other places when the laws were less strict about moving plants around. It would now be harder to do that. with all the strictness around border crossings. But when they started out planting, they were putting in slips of cuttings and things from all over the world that if they wanted it down there, that's what they'd do. Bill Mollison, you might be familiar, he's the Australian man who started the concept of permaculture. But permaculture incorporates all kinds of concepts that are not unique to permaculture, like forest gardening and things that ideas that existed before permaculture as a word came into being. But when it was originally designed as a theory, it did not look at the possibility of invasive species as much as we are aware of now being a problem. So now we would have to think out, well, maybe that analog species isn't so great to bring into our country because it's going to take over and push out the indigenous species, etc. That hasn't been a huge problem with what they've planted here, because this fellow, Doug Bullock, he's actually very knowledgeable in temperate and tropical plants, so he kind of is aware of that. But that was one of the big debates in classroom one day. People were super heated. It was a great argument. I loved it.
You answered my question before I even got a
Oh,
chance.
about invasive species.
Because all the, look at the damage we've done. Even in the earthworms, we're invading
Right.
places.
Like
with
bringing in,
earthworms.
what, Californian earthworms or what?
I couldn't tell you right
Okay.
now which ones, but you
Yeah.
know. So that's.
Well, even slugs, like I used to live on the coast, and those black slugs,
Yeah.
those are not indigenous to Canada. Those are the ones that are very damaging. The long green,
Yes.
brown ones are indigenous to Canada. But the black ones that they're
look like a
very
piece of
prolific,
tar.
yeah, those were brought in, they traveled in on their own, I think.
Yeah.
But those are the very damaging ones.
So what is how has permaculture as a study? How does it look on invasive plants?
Well, if you read Bill Mollison's original textbooks, which is like a big fat tome
Yeah.
of a book, it doesn't really address that.
It doesn't.
So you'd have to look at newer information.
Yeah.
So because it is a concept, well, it was known about in the 80s, because that's when he was writing his books, but it was less in the public mind than it is now. But now, with other thinkers and going in, it is definitely of consideration. So if you want to bring in an analog plant, when I use that word analog, I mean from a different country, you really have to know its growth pattern. Like here, we have a big problem in Canada with Japanese knotweed, which I was introduced to it with the name of runaway Japanese bamboo, because it runs away and takes over. And it's not a big problem in the interior here, but on the coast, it's a serious problem.
Yeah.
And so it's also a problem is the yellow flower bean family one that's all over the Gulf Islands and fixes nitrogen. It's great, but it pushes everything else out. Broom. Thank you.
Yeah.
Scotch broom. Yeah. Beautiful,
Yeah.
but also very invasive.
So are invasive plants more of a problem in temperate zones like this than in a place where it's vibrant with many
No.
more species?
It can be anywhere.
Okay.
It depends where you are and what invasive plant. Like in the south of the U.S. is the kuzu vine, which was brought in from Japan, I believe, and was brought in to stabilize slopes from erosion. But it took off like crazy. And it has some medicinal use and has some edible use. So, it has some function, but it has pushed out a lot of indigenous plants in the southern U.S. So it's considered very invasive.
Yeah.
And so, these things really need to be considered in your design plan. Okinawa spinach, this was quite yummy. The reason why I have quotation marks around it is because when I have that on the name, it means I'm spelling it phonetically, because I never managed to catch the proper spelling. So, but Okinawa is what they said. And this one I really like, Malabar spinach vine. This, in fact, is growing up the wall that was built for the house that we looked down on to look at the water cistern early on, and that they have these greens planted because actually in Nicaragua there's not a lot of greens, edible greens naturally growing that the local community eat. They don't eat as much greens maybe as some of us might eat, and in fact that was a dietary adaptation that I had to get used to, and most of the other students too, because we moved from a lot of veggies and a little starch to a lot of starch and a little veggies, and that was a little tough on everybody's system. It was so tough, people were like announcing that they had a bowel movement. I'm like, hey everybody, guess what? I'm so happy today. Anyway, so this is Indian lettuce. I might have that one in sideways. I think I actually do. Okay, so good. I'll have to flip that at a later time. I don't think I noticed, but it was pretty late last night. We were finishing this up. Okay, but that was another good tasting one. And Doug Bullock, the head instructor there, this is called culantro, and actually tastes a little bit like cilantro, which was kind of interesting. And so they had as many greens as they could figure out how to put in. And the Haitian basket vine used for weaving baskets, I added there that it's related to pokeweed, because I don't know if any of you are familiar with poke root or pokeweed, same plant, pokeweed. It grows in the southern U.S., but when we had our previous farm on the coast in Squamish Valley, we grew poke root that was like 10 or 12 feet tall. It somehow loved the climate, even though it's a southern U.S. thing, but it was very humid and it just really took off. And it looks so similar because they're in the same family, same kind of leaves. And I'm sure you've seen prickly pear cactus. If you've ever been to Hornby Island, we have it here too, right? Yeah. So that's edible. You take off the thorny bits, and the skin is edible, and the inside is edible. You just have to avoid the...
Tastes like potato.
You sound disappointed. But lovely, eh? So it grows big there, though. So this is quail grass, and celosia is the Latin name. And this is on the farm, and it gets planted there. One for beauty, too. It's in the amaranth family, so when the flowers go to seeds, the seeds are edible. And that's Dave. And here's a yam. Dioscorea is a Latin name for yam. You can grow it up here. Like I have friends on the coast that grow it. I don't know about here in Grand Forks, but definitely on the coast. The tuber underground is edible, but it also is medicine. There's different kinds of yams, as you know, like we can eat sweet potatoes and yams. But there's the steroidal yam that is a source material for birth control pills, is from this plant. And in Chinese medicine, it's Dioscorea batata, another yam that's very starchy, that's also used for very calming, grounding medicine in Chinese medicine. So yams provide a lot of different things, food and medicine, and they grow as a vine. And, okay, this looks just like a stellar jay, except it has a really long tail. So that's a tropical jay. Okay, might not be in perfect focus. This is the beautiful sink we got to wash up at every day.
Wow.
And it overlooks the ocean from high up on the farm that we're at. It's right close to the kitchen. You always had to wash your hands because we were dropping like flies, people getting sick with Central American illnesses. There's a picture of me in there. Yeah. Anyway, so it was always encouraged to wash your hands, wash your hands. I only got sick at the very end for 24 hours, a really rough 24 hours. And I thought maybe it was because I'd been brushing my teeth with the tap water. Because some people didn't. They would only brush their teeth with the filtered water from the B&B.
How long were you there?
I was there for almost a month. Yeah.
Did you bring back any worms?
I don't think so, but you know what? When I came home, I'm a herbalist, so I self-treat all the time. I did a whole anti-parasitical cleanse that I made myself using wormwood and stuff, and I did that just to be safe, on the safe side. Yeah,
because I was in the Caribbean at one point in '69, and everybody who was on a 2-year program came back with worms. Everybody.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Oh my God. Doug Bullock, one of the teachers that's gone by in the photos, he told us that he's been lived all over the world and in the tropics a lot, and he told us a horrendous story of his own experience having a tapeworm. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I'm washing my hands every moment here. And actually, after I brushed my teeth, I put a little bit of immune tonic in my mouth and swish. But I still had a 24-hour sickness that knocked me down. But the course was already over, so I didn't miss school. Some of the students would miss days of school being sick. This is not the hand wash stand, which was a beautiful mosaic one. This is the wash stand next to the kitchen that the local women would use, because it was Nicaraguan women that cooked all our food and did a fantastic job, because they were feeding like maybe 70 people at a time. And when you see the kitchen, you'll be blown away at the job that they did. And this is their wash stand, doing all their toweling and stuff. But these are women not working at the perma farm, doing their own wash just in the lake of their laundry, and that's how they would do it. I was in a boat moving kayak, sorry, it's not perfectly sharp there.
And they use the bushes for clotheslines.
Yeah, well, there's a string hung there.
I saw
too.
them using bushes.
Yeah, that you
Are
can
they
see.
using a soap of some sort?
I didn't see this water soapy, but they do, and that's actually a good question because we had 5 Central American people with us in the course, and 4 of them were students on scholarships, and because otherwise it was all people from outside of Central America studying. And the 5th one was a translator from Costa Rica, just a really smart guy. He didn't know how to put up a tent, though. He had to do that, but really smart. And he just translated constantly. He must have been exhausted. And the reason why I'm talking about him is because he was granted a scholarship in Norway because he was top of his class in Nicaragua, no, Costa Rica, he was from. And they have programs for developing nation students who are promising. And he went to university in Norway and became a soap chemist. And then another fellow was working in various nonprofit groups in Nicaragua. A lot of the students had been in Central America a long time doing other things. And he wanted to get the people using non-phosphate soap because they're washing in the lake. And I set the 2 of them up when I found out there too, just from talking. I said, oh, you got to talk to this guy, right? And the soap chemist. Because the women liked the soap to sud because it could get the clothes cleaner. So there were natural alternatives that weren't so sudsy, but they were hesitant to use them. Here's our outdoor kitchen that we ate in and the women cooked in. Oh, that slide was already in. Oh, how did that happen? I don't know.
Dual purpose.
Oh yeah,
Picture
that's
slides.
right. And here she is. She's looking at Willie J. that her and I like to look at in our group all the time. And he was pretty sweet. And he's harvesting the jackfruit. He was like from Virginia or Vermont or something. Because you only have double names from places like that, right? Like Susie Jean or something. And this is a poisonous bug they warned us against. So whenever you touched a plant, you had to look under the leaf and over the leaf so that you didn't get bit. And there they are all crowding around just wanting to eat you up. But I never did. Actually, when I would swim in the lake, some things would nibble my feet.
Does it spit a caustic? It looks like one of the family.
It might, but I don't know for
yeah,
sure. Because they didn't spit at me.
All right.
Yeah. This is the ceiling of the classroom. So I was just lying on the bamboo floor during a break and photographing the thatched roof above us that kept us in the shade because it would just get hot. And here, I'm on one volcano on the permaculture farm photographing the volcano also on the same island, but because it's an isthmus, the water comes in on both sides and looking from one volcano over to the other.
So were you on the north or the south?
We were on the south slope. The north winds would come up to us.
But which volcano were you on, the north or the south one?
Oh, they were east and west, actually, I think.
Okay.
And were you the one that's been on Ometepe?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the one the ferry goes to.
Yeah, we were on the one the ferry goes to.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for helping me with that. This is the wind power they had generating because they didn't have any hydro, so it was all by wind power that they created it, and also solar panels. And so this is in Chris's house, where it also had the water cistern below, so they're storing it in the batteries. And so there was a couple of hours of light in the evening, but not very much, so if you needed to do stuff, you had to do it soon. And this is just, this is the kitchen, everyone's lining up to get food. But why I have this slide is because the metal roofs were used, one, they're so loud they didn't use them on anyone's residences because when the rainy season came, it was monsoons and the noise apparently was just so loud that people just didn't want them on their homes. But other places like bodegas, which would be tool sheds, or people might sit under here to eat, they use metal so that they could catch the water. And it's slightly sloped. You see it's higher on the right-hand side than the left. They're catching the water off the end of it. So wherever it wasn't like a housing situation, they could afford to bring in metal, because they got to bring it in from far away, they would use those because they wanted water catchment.
They do any drying on them?
drying plants and stuff. No, they did all the drying on screens because it wouldn't be appropriate to dry directly on that metal, right, because of the contamination. Here's a peach palm, and they consider that a permaculture all-star, meaning it has so many multiple functions. But the fruits are like half a pound each and edible, so really good food source. And then the hearts of the palm were eaten as well, like a vegetable, like a starchy vegetable. And it can give lumber and things like that, so these were really a valued tree. Here's a lemongrass at the side. We all are familiar with lemongrass if you ever have eaten Thai cooking. But the value for the lemongrass was that it is used as an insect repellent during the rainy season, because when the rainy season's there, it's very buggy. And I wasn't there during the rainy season, but they valued it for that because then there was a lot of mosquitoes and things like that. So lemongrass was what they used. You could just rub it right on your skin, or you could make a product out of it. And here's an open field, and I'm showing it because that's what the entire farm was when they purchased it 10 years ago. Well, it's 11 years ago now. But it was an open field that had been grazed by cattle for quite a long time, and they figured that 2 feet of topsoil had been lost to the cattle grazing, because it's also steep, right? So things are sliding down. So this is Chris Shanks. He was another one of the instructors. He was the one that lived in the house by the water cistern and had built that home. He's showing us, this is what this place looked like, an open field. But also, when we had to get our design certificate, we had to do designs. So these fields outside of the property were divvied up between us, and we had to pace them out and do a topographical assessment and then design a farm based on the needs of imaginary clients, because that was part of the project, right? So the client would say, I am this type of a person and I want that, and we had to go out and design it. And there was one tape measure, and everything was done by pacing. And I was describing to my husband, who's a carpenter, last night that we were doing our topography by setting one person down in a ravine and the other person up on the slope. And one person says, well, my eyes are at about your chest level, so there must be a 2-foot dip or something. John said, they didn't even have a level? But no, they didn't. So everything was done just sort of that way, but it worked, when we put our maps together and our designs and things. Okay, this is hard to see, but there's a whole row of bats. There's 6 bats hanging out on that tree on the right-hand side. Can you see them?
Wow. Right there, right?
Yep. Yeah. I was paddling on my day off. Had got the worst sunburn of my whole life that day. And we were in the isthmus paddling. And the isthmus goes very far into the land, like a little dead-ended inlet. And that's where I saw that. And I almost didn't put this in, but my son really liked it. He wrote the word monkeys. And there's monkeys hidden in those trees. And you can't really see them too well, but they were howler monkeys, and they kept us up at night. And they would come really close unless you went to see them. And then they'd scatter away. So if you tried to swim near them, or you tried to move close to photograph them, they'd move further into the branches. But at night, there'd be this shrieking howls, like zombie movie howls. And it sometimes sounded like it was right outside the window. And it would be the howler monkeys having a good time. And this is all the cormorants, just showing a little bit of wildlife, because we have cormorants on our coast as well, but ours are black and a little bit smaller. And here's a white heron, like we have the great blue heron, and they have a tropical white heron. And this is another instructor, Jackie Pitts, and she's young, beautiful, awesome, and so smart. I learned so much from her. I was just delighted with her ability. I was kayaking with her. And here she's digging ginger root up. And so because they planted it, they were growing it there. And it's a little blurry because I moved too close with the camera, but that's the fresh ginger root coming up. And here's fresh turmeric, which is in the same family as ginger, but it's a little bit narrower and not as knobbly, rounder. And we were and that also grew on the farm. In fact, that's what they were giving everybody that was getting sick, right? In fact, I found out where the stash was, and I was keeping myself alive with it. I was taking a lot of turmeric. Good dye, too. A really good anti-cancer herb, by the way. In alternative medicine, one of the best. And so we were taking the ginger and the turmeric and making kimchi. Kimchi is originally a Korean food, but you can make it with anything. It's traditionally done with a kind of cabbage, but here we were doing it with unripe jackfruit and a type of mango. We were doing fruit kimchis, and the fermentation happens very quickly in Central America because there's so much in the air, different spores and the heat and everything. But we were making these awesome spicy kimchis, and what you have to have is the ginger and garlic and turmeric and hot pepper. There's always hot pepper in it, but what your base is can change. It doesn't have to be cabbage. It could be something else, like a fruit or something. So here's our ingredients that we put in to our kimchi, working with it. And here we're harvesting for Medicine Making Day, which I got to teach because that's what I do. So they asked me to teach that one, and I did. So I had everybody out picking different things, and we made up some tinctures and stuff because they have their own first aid kit on the permaculture farm, and it's all from the farm, which is the whole idea of self-sustainability. But self-sustainability is almost a misnomer because the idea of community is also very strong in permaculture as well, because if you have surplus, you share it. You don't bury it in the ground, and you don't, like some farm policies might do, government policies. Poinsettias, we know them as little tiny Christmas plants, but there they grow as great big bushes and are beautiful. And that one was in full bloom. That was actually on a different permaculture farm, also on Ometepe Island. And this one excited me to no end. Madagascar periwinkle. The reason why it excited me is because I have a client on the coast. I still see my clients on the coast. I practice as a herbalist with clients, and I have a client that has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and this is very specific to his condition, and it's a very hard medicine to find, and I have to source it out from different companies, and I've been treating him for over 10 years, and he's in his late 80s now, doing really well. And this is the particular medicine. It's a little toxic, so you have to have the dose right and not go over the dose, but it keeps all his white blood cell count well. So when I saw it, I was like really excited. Oh, this is a plant I've been using in tincture form and had never met the actual plant. And it also comes with white flowers too. And here we have a gateway, which is the typical Nicaraguan gate, because like Europe, people move through the fields. They're crossing other people's property on trails that have been in place for possibly hundreds of years. And these are the stiles or the gateways that you have to go through. And they were I kind of thought they were kind of neat how they made them, because that's something we lack in North America, actually. We have all this, if it's private property, you're trespassing if you're on it. And that keeps people from connecting with nature because you're stuck on the road, or you can't access the waterfront or whatever. But there, and the same in Europe, there's trails and paths that go everywhere, and they're established, and it doesn't matter that it's private property. If you stay on the trail, it's legal, and that's how people get around through the woods. And that's what keeps the cattle in, and here they are crapping in a little stream, because that happens all over the place. And the cattle are thinner there. A lot of them are really bony, and the horses run wild, so they're just on the beach. And it's not like everything's fenced in the way it is up here, And this is the cook stove in the permaculture kitchen that the Nicaraguan woman, I should have had a photo of them because they're so awesome. They cooked for like 70 people on that. And they provided our meals. And they also had something like an open barbecue at the side. But they worked so hard because we were a class of like 50, and there was 30 interns that lived on the farm all the time, and some of them were also students and some of them weren't. And in the background you see the little greens garden, which nobody was allowed to pick in because the greens were so precious. And in fact, you weren't allowed to dish out your own greens because we would have taken way too much as a portion, and they'd give you the little portion you were allowed to make it go around to everybody. Here's a really nice outdoor shower. It's not on the farm. It's actually one of my friends there I made, who was a student there. This lived in Nicaragua, and this was her place.
It was bottles and jars.
Yes, they're glass bottles and jars that they collected for a long time to put in the walls and to let some light in so they could light up. Kitchens and bathrooms were all outdoors, generally speaking. And she was American. Her husband was from New Zealand, and they lived in Nicaragua. And here's another shot of the building. You see they had some tile up on the top for the roofing there that they had brought in or had made. I'm not really sure where they got the tile. And Some of the local women are in there too. And this is on the other permaculture farm, and this is one of the thatched roof buildings, open format buildings. They were having a party and they invited our perma farm over to their perma farm. So that was really nice on our day off. And this was their food dryer, which I was completely taken with. It's solar heated with the glass there, but they could also build a little fire in the bottom too. So they could dry by solar, and they could add a fire if it was a rainy season or whatever. And there was a little door on the right, and you could open it, and all the shelves of screens were in there, and they were drying different beans and other things that they had going on in there. But I was losing the light and my camera battery, so I didn't get the internal one. Oh, you've been south, you know about the mosquito netting, because that's what keeps you alive. It's actually really not even so much for mosquitoes in the dry season, but we had a tarantula in our room and stuff, so I was like really tucking in my edges there. Anyway, and the howler monkeys outside that window. Here we're at the B&B. We walked down the volcano to the town of Balgüe, which is where we stayed, and here everyone's working at night on their design project, because they gave us very little time off and lots of homework, so we had to work into the wee hours. And but I took time out anyway, and that was up in the treehouse. And you can see the other volcano there, and a Canadian woman just from the Okanagan there was lending me her banjo, so I got to play banjo, which was fun. And here, the Mano Amiga Community Center is one of the things that the farm I was on, by the way, it was called Finca Bonafida, Finca meaning farm. That was the name of it. And through their fundraising, they built this community center for the town of Balgüe, and it provided children's breakfast. It had a women's sewing collective that this wonderful young Australian woman headed and got going. And they did all kinds of courses and teaching, and they had some internet access for the local community there. And a lot of fundraising was done through us students, that we would leave and say, do people want to put money in? But you know what? A lot of this was funded from people in West Vancouver. Nicaragua has some connection to BC, and West Vancouver people had put in a lot of money towards this. And there was coffee farms on this island too. And most of the coffee was bought by companies in Washington State and BC. I think Salt Spring Island coffee might come from Ometepe Island. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they said Salt Spring Island in particular. So this was one of the community things that they put back into the community, because these farms are not owned by local people. But one of the things they did, well, they raised $10,000 at the beginning. And they consulted with the community. They thought in their own minds, wow, you guys don't eat lots of vegetables, you need more greens or vegetables. But they learned that you really have to ask the people what they want. And so they asked the community, well, what would you like to see here? And they said, we want more milk and eggs for our children, because they're poor and they don't have a lot of protein sources, and they eat a lot of starch, basically, lots of rice and beans, which are good. And anyway, so that's what they did first, was they started the food program, bringing in milk and eggs, and then they started adding more fruit and veggies into it, and that's how they got the part they thought should be in to their diet into it. But they started out by bringing what the people wanted, and so the kids get a really wholesome breakfast in there. They get milk and eggs and jackfruit and other things going on in it. And so that's Mano Amiga. And this is little girl Penelope. I told you one of my friends lived there, the shower stall with the glass bottles. This is her home and her little girl. Mm-hmm. And she's being raised in Nicaragua, and they now have another baby too, because Jen was pregnant at the time of the course. And this is her outdoor kitchen on the right-hand side, because everything is outdoors pretty much there. And the little girl was sweet. Her and I would go swimming all the time together. And her mom wasn't a big swimmer, so anytime I came near, she'd run up to me, let's go swimming, so we would. And that was in the estuary. This is not on Ometepe Island. This is in the northwest corner of Nicaragua, near the Honduran border. Very hot, very dry, and very much poorer than the south, Ometepe. And this property was on the estuary that headed out into the ocean. And she said, oh, yeah, there's alligators, but they're further up. Mm-hmm. And that made me hesitate a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay, there's alligators. She says, but you won't see them down here. I'm like, okay. So I had my eyes really alert. And I had the little girl in the water with me. I thought, oh my God, I got to protect her. But anyway, she was just sweet. So we had a good time together. And so that's pretty much it. I mean, some of you have to go back to work, and I don't want to keep you longer, but that's not all the slides, of course, but that's it for today, and I thank you all very much for coming out.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Okay, they're brighter over here on the computer screen. Then you get like really better lighting somehow. But yeah. Oh, and I will, by the way, I am teaching in June a 2-week permaculture course at Johnson's Landing Retreat, which will focus more on temperate plantings as opposed to tropical, and it's a live-in situation at the retreat, and there's a day off in the middle, so it spans 15 days. Starts on June 3rd. So if anyone's interested, just Google Johnson's Landing Retreat or Taken Issues magazine, because it'll be in there. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.